welcome to the first of our social work webinars. This webinar is social work and social media. So welcome to you. My name is Jenny Simpson. I'm the head of social work for England, and it's great that you have joined us. We are joined by a number of guests today who will be discussing with me social work and social media. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to begin with our first guest, Gemma. And Gemma, if you'd introduce yourself.
Hi, I'm Gemma Ryan. I am a lecturer in nursing. I've worked in health and social care as well, and my research background is on professional accountability, social media, and some of the legal aspects of that.
Hello, my name's Joanne Westwood. I'm Head of Social Work at the University of Salford. I've been interested in social media and social work education and practice for several years. I'm very pleased to be here today to have a discussion and contribute to the webinar.
Hello all, my name is Onginjo from the University of Bedfordshire. I would also like to say that I'm also very pleased to be here this morning with my research interest touching on social workers' use of social media to engage with client information in England. I just want to reiterate and say that I'll be focused mostly on children and young people social workers. Thanks a lot and hope you enjoy the presentation.
Thank you. Thanks very much. So just to remind you of the abstract, so this webinar will consider how the profession of social work is actually responding to social media, both its challenges and also its opportunities. We'll be particularly focusing on how you as a social work student need to reflect on your own use of social media, as well as how social media actually impacts on the profession as a whole. What you'll be doing is you'll be hearing some of the latest research that social work practitioners are doing, and some of that will actually come from Paul, because that's what his PhD is in, so it's fantastic to hear what's actually going on the ground. So what I'm going to do now is I'm just going to ask a number of questions, and my first question is actually directed to Joanne and Paul. So first question is this: how do you think the internet and social media is changing how social work is done? Joanne?
I think it's changing it in several different ways. So I think there's changes in the relational aspect, because social media does provide a way for social workers to communicate with service users in different ways and build relationships and keep in touch as a professional. And the other side of that is there's a monitoring and surveillance role as well. I think one of the other areas is around intensifying the distinctions between personal and professional boundaries, and I think Gemma's going to pick that up for us a bit more. I think in terms of regulatory changes, and I think that there are certainly more referrals going to HCPC for fitness to practice because of high profile cases around use of social media. There's been some interesting, what I'd call common sense reactions. So, for example, a judge recently said that we should actually be looking up families in our role as social workers to try and address issues going on in families. I think there's two sides. I think there's caution and I think there's optimism. And I don't think we're shifting very far from those. Yeah. There's lots of ethical issues, and I think we'll pick those up. And I think one of the key risks is around promoting quite defensive practice. So, for example, if you're working with a family who decide that they're going to record what you're talking about on their smartphone and broadcast that, you haven't got a lot of control over that. So it shifts some of the power that you have in your relationships with people. They might also set up online groups to critique and criticise what you're doing. So I think there's lots of different challenges and lots of different ways. Yeah. I don't think there's any one answer, Jenny.
No, I don't believe there is. Paul, do you want to add to that?
Oh, well, I would say by a very interesting phrase where my lecturer used to say, social work as a practice operate in what we call swampy lowland.
Right.
And you see with the what you call the influx of social media or the coming in of social media, we can't ignore social media. It has just taken a trajectory rise, and the upturn is just so high. So in regards to how social media is changing social work practice, from what I'm finding from the field is there's a lot of anxiety by social workers. And it's fully understandable in terms of the anxiety, in terms of the differences between the ethical and unethical practices.
Yes.
Most of the social workers know very certain where do we stand in terms of the social media. It's very evident that social media has taken what we call a digital turn. And in one way or the other, what has happened is that it has crept into social work as a practice. So it's the big question at the moment that I'm tending to ask most social work practitioners is that can social work remain protected and connected at the same time?
Nice terminology.
It's such a very big question we need to keep asking ourselves. But what I'm finding at the moment is we can't completely turn our back against social media.
Right.
The thing is, there's one importance of advocating for the use of social media in social work at the moment is that there's a bit of connection between the young people. A case in example, a social worker calls one of the clients who's a young person. In the midst of his friend, the client wouldn't be able to answer the phone because what he's trying to do is trying to cover himself from the friend of the aspect that once he answers that phone, his friend will be asking him, who are you talking to?
Yes.
Oh, I'm talking to my social worker. So instead of responding and expounding and removing that bracket of cover of being in care, what they're intending to is they're communicating so much on social media.
Right.
So the big question which is coming in from social work is, how do we embrace social work? I mean, how do you embrace social media without being slapped? Okay. How do you operate in a way that we are emphasizing the element of developing positive relationship with our client?
And on that note, I think I'm going to turn to Gemma really, because actually some of the questions that you're raising actually feed into the wider social work profession. But and I know your research background in terms of professionalism. So if we could kind of start at that top end in terms of the question here, which is about how has social media actually impacted on professionalism in general.
And certainly across health and social care, I think there are across all of the professions there's some similar challenges certainly, and some of the questions you have just raised, Paul, are very similar to some of the ones being raised in medicine and in nursing and wider health and social care. So I think that the professionalism is a big thing. One of the main things that comes up over and over again is this this blurring of boundaries between sort of your social, your personal and your professional life. Certainly when you're at work, there used to be this physical boundary. You could leave work and you psychologically there's this, we are leaving this area. All of a sudden, with the social media and the internet, that boundary that psychological boundary no longer exists. And sometimes, it's this unseen. Networks can be huge. You could have a friend of a friend who is actually someone who is a service user, and you would never really know that unless you were really looking for it. So some of the things that you say are completely unintentional. So you've got those blurring of those sort of three kind of domains of practice and areas of your life. But you've also then got the concept of unintended consequences. So something can be done very innocently and with real justification at the time, but have a really significant impact on the at the end point.
Is that because the audience is that much wider? Whereas if you think about the kind of psychological barrier that existed between work and our social life before the invention of social media, we had a small community of people around us who are our colleagues and our friends and so on. But now, because of social media and particularly whatever your privacy setting is set at, that audience is much wider. Would you say that that's why there's some of those unintended consequences? Because actually, what we might be thinking we're saying something to our immediate friends, but we don't know with regards to our immediate friends what their settings are and who's looking in on their account, so to speak.
And along with that is that someone else can do something on social media and it can appear that you've done it, but the context of the situation might be completely different. So I know one of the examples that I've been frequently giving is this concept of what they call fraping, where someone has taken your account and done something because they think it's funny, when in fact, you know, that's had this you know, people have thought it was you when it's not you. And it seems funny at the time, but you know, the people on the receiving end of that might not know you that well. You know, this concept of friend in social media isn't actually someone who you would perhaps normally be friends with in the physical domain. So you know, we can sometimes be lured into this false sense of security that I'm with my friends, and these people are commenting on that, when in fact the audience is far wider and far reaching.
Do either of you want to kind of build on what Gemma has said around professionalism, particularly from a social work perspective?
Just in terms of professional boundaries, so there was some research that was done by Ryan and Garrett, and their research looked at the use of digital and social media with social workers in Ireland. And they found examples of social workers saying actually it's okay to maintain a relationship with an ex-client due to their mutual participation in local peer support groups. These clients are like any other professional contact. So it's not clear cut, and I don't know if we've got our heads around that, particularly in social work, because I think if you're going to kind of shift professionalism and shift those ideas about what it means to be a profession, if everybody's not on board with that, then it causes chaos and disquiet. But I'm not sure that you can kind of deal with things always on a case-by-case basis. So there has to be some solid principles, I think, about what is okay and acceptable and what is definitely not okay and not acceptable.
And
So-
that is absolutely reflected in the research that I've just completed. Exactly the same.
And it's good that, you know, we've all got the same sort of ideas because we're all kind of involved in this area. So I would add that. And I think the other sort of angle on that is around being professional in a digital space. Means something different, slightly different to being a professional in a traditional face-to-face context, I think.
Absolutely, and that is possibly, I mean, we are going to be kind of touching on that as part of this discussion anyway. I don't know, Paul, if you want to kind of add anything to what's been said.
I think the biggest challenge I'm experiencing in this is in terms of maintaining professionalism as a social worker, as a practitioner, is the element of private and public.
Right.
Because I mean, once you are connected online, you can't really define your boundaries. In one way or the other, as long as you go any link to social media, your information or your presence will appear somewhere along the line. It might be somewhere, maybe you are registered. I mean, a good example is maybe you are registered in in one of the clubs, okay, and maybe during those clubs you got like an end of year party. And you are finding a position where you didn't intend to be in that position, but due to the connection of the online, I mean the public and private, maybe your friend's friend has connected you or has tagged you a picture. So what does that picture reflect on the client? What message is the client saying? You're there in high heel, you're struggling all the way around. Then the next day, you are trying to tell of a parent who has been drunk or his misuse of alcohol in front of the child. Then he's turning around and saying, "Oh, I wasn't as bad as you in that end of year party." So how do you protect yourself?
I think what it brings with it is a higher level of accountability as never before. There are huge levels of accountability, and I think you're absolutely right, Gemma, that there is, you know, the public and Paul as well, that the public and the private, that boundary is now being lost altogether, and actually it's almost like you have to be on social work profession mode 24/7, both in the online world and in the offline world. But the reality is that now the use of social media is such an integral part of our lives that there is no offline and online. Actually, the two are merging. Okay, I don't know if anybody's got any thoughts around that.
I think one of the big things that Joe picked up is that I think one of the issues that comes up, and I say this quite frequently, is that Facebook isn't the problem. People are kind of the problem here, and that we as a profession we've got no consensus about what. Some people, like you were saying, think that this is okay.
Yes.
Some people on the other side of the country think that this is awful and people have been disciplined for it. And so there's this huge grey area where we're not sure whether we are doing something right or wrong, because as a profession as a whole, even health and social care, we have not yet decided what is completely unprofessional, what is unacceptable but probably doesn't need any action taking, and what is just completely unacceptable across the board.
Yes, yeah.
And I think that's one of the big challenges that we have associated with professionalism, because you cannot, although accountability is a huge a factor, and it is about being professional, the only way you can justify your actions or omissions is by and understand why you're making those decisions is within set parameters, and at the moment there aren't really any widely accepted parameters that are sort of benchmark. This is what we would expect.
Although there are parameters in the sense that we do have guidance from the regulators. So we have guidance from the Healthcare Professions Council, we have guidance from the British Association of Social Work. They have given guidance. But I think it goes back to what Joanne said. It's very cautious. Everything is, and I've certainly done a search as part of preparing for today, and we'll be sending you some resources as well, where actually I went to look at one particular regulator, and it was simply don't, and it was like, okay, but what if people are and doing, then what happens?
So, I mean, I found the same thing. I ran, it was particularly on healthcare rather than social work, but there are many similarities with the regulatory bodies anyway. And what I found is that the guidance tends to focus on some of the most obvious things, such as don't breach confidentiality, don't have current service users or patients as friends, and don't correspond with them on Facebook and other sort of forms of social media. And what I found was through my research is that people tend to know that already. For the most part, people tend to know that already. The problem exists where you've got that in between, where you've got sort of kind of unique circumstances, or the context is slightly different, or one of the other big problems that came up is people were being held to account for things that they'd done 8 years ago, because that came up on their public profile, and actually we that's it makes them look like they're being unprofessional when in fact they weren't at the time.
They were in their early 20s and really hadn't kind of decided what they were doing.
And that is just simply the use of Facebook settings means that you can set something and it will be from here forwards, but it means then when someone views your public profile, it will be quite dated. So it's that suspension in time that you get from the social media that you probably wouldn't get normally.
I think at this point it'd be really good to turn to you, Joanne, because we've covered quite a gamut of subtopics here, and it's about actually what does that mean for me as a student. I'm a social work student. I'm just going about my daily business. I'm in my studies. I'm doing my placement. I'm involved in all these things, but actually social media is a very normal part of my life. What do you think current social work students need to do in terms of making any changes to their social media profiles?
I think it's really important, I think it's for students and practitioners to have a really good think about what you use social media for. It's definitely appropriate to review your privacy settings on a really regular basis, and think about different accounts for different purposes perhaps. So I'll give you an example from myself really. So I have, I think I have 2 Facebook accounts. One is a personal one to do with my hobbies and interests and family, etc. That's private. I'd be hard pressed to find myself on it really. And another one which is work related, which is where all my work activity takes place and my connections with my peers and colleagues, etc. And similarly with Twitter, I think maybe 4 or 5 accounts, Instagram, you know. So think about the different accounts that you've got and what you use them for, and regularly review the privacy settings. And it might mean that you end up having 2 accounts, and there's a debate there in itself, you know, because if you're a social worker or in any, you know, profession that's regulated, you should. Are you always that professional?
Yes.
Are you always that person?
Yes.
You know, I'm not saying that anything that I say or do on my private account is very different from what I do on my professional account. But you know that raises questions in itself. It's like, are they the same? And I do question myself, why have I got 2 accounts? But I actually don't think people would be that interested in my cycling hobbies. You know, apart from people that, you know, that do it in the group that I'm in.
I think some of what you're saying from that point of view is you're almost trying to create that physical boundary that we would have in our we would have without the internet being present.
And you would have different friendship networks that maybe wouldn't ever come together because you think, oh, they'd all fall out with each other, you know. So you might keep people separate for those reasons anyway.
So my approach to that is similar to yours, but I have just the one Facebook account. Actually, most of you probably wouldn't be able to find me on it due to the nature of how I set it up. But I manage what I post, so I will have a list of, I think it's about 15 people, and they see everything I post, and then I have everybody else, and that might be just sort of random things that get shared, like videos, health awareness kind of days and things like that. So that I segregate mine based on having lists of people and only sharing with that particular group at that particular time. One of the other things I do is make sure that I have the settings so that if something is shared and I am tagged in it, I receive an alert. So first of all, it can't appear on my timeline without me approving it, and second of all, I'm then alerted to the fact that something's been shared with my name on it or in it. So if it is something that I feel that it shouldn't be shared more widely, you can at least stop it early-ish.
I think there's some sort of questions I thought you would ask yourself as a student, and I've asked myself, is who's got access to this and what will they see about me? It was one of the first areas. What do I want my colleagues and clients to know about me? Do I post about people I work with? If I was contacted by a service user, would I respond? And I've asked that question to several cohorts of students. And there's, you know, with varying responses. At some points, would it be appropriate, etc. And that's where we go back to case by case. And finally, the question I'd ask is, can people I don't know contact me on social media? And that does take you back to your privacy settings and those questions about your personal and professional boundaries, I think.
Anybody else want to kind of add to what Joanne has said, really?
I mean, I've certainly had some of the students I've had in the past. They've been contacted by service users. One of them was really positive. They were thanking them for caring for their mother. And that was really, you know, in some ways that was a really, really nice thing for them to do. They didn't enter into any dialogue, but it was nice for them to receive that. On the other hand, I've seen instances where someone has said, I'm feeling suicidal. And at what point does that line cross? Because you do have a duty of care to that person. So Facebook do have a method of escalating that, of which you would probably use on that occasion. But it's that concept of, if service users think that's acceptable, you know, it's not just about what we think is acceptable. Certainly in the mental health field, a service user tried to add, a young man tried to add one of our younger nurses, and obviously that was a bit of a difficult conversation, and that then had an impact on that therapeutic relationship, because they were vulnerable anyway with a mental health condition, and they saw the relationship to be something that it wasn't.
I was just wondering, Joanne, in terms of the advice that you've given to students, it's not too late to clean up your account, is it? If you think that in actual fact, you know, there's a few dodgy things on there that I want off, that actually, you know, they were put there 3 years ago. At that time, I really wasn't thinking about social work. My life has changed significantly. I'm now a social work student. I'm beginning to get to grips with the responsibilities in the profession itself. Can they kind of clean it up?
Absolutely, yeah, get onto it. And definitely before you start applying for jobs. I don't think employers do this as a matter of course, but it goes back to that question of what do I want other people to see about me. And I think if you're starting looking for employment, definitely, but whilst you're a student in Scotland, and I think where you're registered with the Scottish Social Care Council, you're registered with them as a student, so you know, you're accountable as a professional from day one of being a student. So yeah, I don't think it's ever too late, and I think it's something that should be done regularly, like you would tidy up your diary or tidy up your desk.
Yes, actually,
really.
That's absolutely. Paul, do you want to add to
I mean,
that in any way?
just to top up a bit of that, I think the main thing also I'd like to maybe to mention to social work students is they got to keep exercising that element of critical judgment. That element of reflection and reflexivity is always very, very important to ask yourself. I mean, I know there's the online and offline persona, but what picture am I sending outside there? That's a key question. Because once you send to that dotted line, you remain a professional all throughout. There's no area for hiding. You can never say, oh, I didn't see that or I didn't see that coming. So that critical judgment is very, very important.
And what would you say about, I mean, what advice would you offer to students with regards to actually being in placement and kind of picking up on what Gemma has said already? If you do find that a service user has contacted you by text, you know, or that actually as part of your placement you might be working with care leavers, and the norm of communication is by text. If you're gonna, you know, and I've heard social workers say, actually, I've sent a text to remind them that I'm having a meeting with them, and that has really been beneficial, because actually they've been able to make last minute changes, change the date and the time quickly. It's not a matter of writing a letter, sending an email that may not be responded to. So I'm just wondering, in that kind of environment of being in placement, and actually, you know, as a student, you're not making use of any kind of social media, or you're using, you know, mobile technologies, but in actual fact what happens is your service users have a kind of expectation, and it's a kind of method and way of working. What would you all advise? Let's start with Joanne first and then move on.
Well, I think one of the first things you would do, so you normally go for a sort of pre-interview, don't you, before you start your placement, is ask about the agency's social media policy. And what are your professional and personal responsibilities towards that? Some agencies don't use it at all, and others do use it, you know, under certain conditions. And I think it's really important to find out about that. Kimball and Kim, who in 2013 were writing about this, they were suggesting that policies should actually be co-produced with service users. They shouldn't just be done by, I don't know, the data protection people. They should actually be involved in developing them. I think it's important to find out who organises and looks after the social media accounts. So there's a couple of examples. One in Aberdeen, who is Aberdeen Foster Care Service with Aberdeen Local Authority. And another one which is I think it's in West Lothian, and that's a Facebook group for care leavers. And those organisations talked to me about how they ran theirs, and they said it was open and transparent. So it wasn't down to one person to run the social media platform, it was something that was actually shared by the team. Sometimes placements and agencies will want students to contribute to a blog or, you know, some activity to report on using social media, and I think you could look for opportunities to do that, because that gets you into the kind of realms of who's going to access this, you know, what do we need to put on. I think you need to always ask about what safeguards and restrictions are in place if social media is used to search for service users, and there's some interesting research around. So Sage and Sage in 2016 have talked about this, and Ryan and Garrett also talked about this. because there's this idea that, I'm just going to look somebody up because I'm a bit curious about what's going on in their lives. And my question would be, okay, so what regulates that? What gives you, what's the legitimizer for you being able to do that, either as a practitioner, as a student? I think it's also important to, in terms of policies in agencies, to ask when it's reviewed, how often it's reviewed, because technology changes so quickly. I mean, we didn't all know what algorithms were 3 months ago, did we? And now, we all know what they are. And obviously, clearly, how do I access the social media policy? And I think as part of the induction, I'm generally seeing that more and more on the induction programmes for students going into agencies.
Okay. All right, Gemma, and then we'll go to Paula. Anything to add in terms of maybe what students need to be mindful of in terms of, if they're in placement? Particularly, let's just particularly talk about if they're approached by a service user, because that was the point that you were making. How is the best way? Because obviously, in terms of social work, the social worker is the tool. It's about relationship, and therefore, in what you were saying, that relationship for that nurse and her patient changed because she had been contacted using social media, and there was a misunderstanding about the nature of that relationship. So what would you say if a service user contacted a social work student whilst on placement using social media? How should they best respond?
Well, I think, first of all, reflecting what Joanne said, local policies are different in different places. So with regards to a professional accountability perspective, you will be expected to operate within the parameters of that policy. So at that local level, being aware, and that's across the board, not necessarily just for social media. One of the other things I would say is look at the context of that situation. For example, that there was the example of being thanked because she'd done something. Actually, is that should alarm bells be ringing because of that? They thanked them. They weren't inviting any kind of relationship. It was just quite an innocent thing. On the other hand, if it's someone who is, it might be someone who's vulnerable, or it could be someone that you've just been working with. What is the context? Are they asking you to be their friend? Or are they Are they sending you a message saying that I'm feeling down? I think I might hurt someone or myself. So the context of that is very important. And I would also, consider how they've found you as well. So first of all, I'm not saying that you shouldn't have your personal life, but there are methods by which you can make it so they can't contact you. So there are settings on all of the social media platforms almost that say no one that I don't know can send me a direct message, which will immediately remove that risk. So it's about thinking about what tools are available to you within the social media platforms that you use.
Would you, and I'll aim this question at Paul really, but would you also be encouraging students, if they are contacted, that actually they seek advice and their support from their practice educator, they seek advice and support from their workplace supervisor, more importantly, on the ground there and then, or any colleagues around them? Would you be suggesting that they do that also?
I think it's very, very important for them to seek, maybe talk to senior practitioners, because as one of your articles suggested, I think that element of thinking is so simple. It's not so simple as such.
Yes.
I mean, because the moment maybe you have responded to that question sent through social media, that's one element of your social life you have opened to. Yeah. It's like you have opened the door to them. Then once you have opened that door to them, how far do you let them in? Yes. You got to keep asking yourself that question, how far do you let them in? But I think it's very, very important as a student to seek guidance from their line managers, from their practice educators, and also have very open, honest conversation with clients. Yeah. Why they might not be able to respond to their queries through social media, and the available options or medium of communication. It's very, very important to seek a second opinion on that.
Okay, brilliant. Okay, I just want to go back to something that Joanne said earlier, where she gave the example of, social work practitioners being able to search for service users online and check up on them. And again, Joanne had mentioned the recent article in Community Care about a judge. There was another article where it was a suggestion by a review, a Section 8 review, that in actual fact, it was perfectly reasonable to check whether a service user had a partner living with them or not, or if they'd come back into their lives. And I must admit, when I read that community care article, I was a bit kind of, I don't know about that. I find that a bit nerve-wracking. And again, Joanne, you had talked about surveillance and this notion of surveillance. So let's kind of unpick that some more. So let's begin with a really simple question. Should social work practitioners be able to search for service users online or check up on them? Can I go to Paul first? Because you're the person doing the research, the PhD around social workers and their practice with social media.
I think it's a very interesting question, but the question that's coming out is the context in there. What are we going in there to look for?
Right. Yeah.
Okay. That's the biggest question. And also other things coming in out in terms of linking to what Joanne is saying is they're coming out different themes in terms of the care and control, the paternalism and protection. So where do we draw the line?
Yes.
Okay. Is it actually ethical? Is it unethical to look for client information which is online? Then the other thing is the complexity around the legal framework. Okay, when you look under Section 1, okay, the welfare of the child is always paramount. Okay, so you as a practitioner, you got a responsibility in ensuring the well-being of the child.
But doesn't that clash up against human rights?
That's the thing. In
You
terms
know,
of
those
the
things
human
jar.
rights and
They
the
don't sit neatly with one another, do they?
and the UNCRC in terms of the human rights under Section 8, the right to privacy. Okay, then you come back under Section 47, significant harm. So the complexity of this, how do we balance them as social workers, and when do you actually identify and give a judgment that I can search up to this level, then after that I'll close my eyes. Okay, you've gone in there, what if that opens another kind of worms? What do you do?
I think and as an aspect of that, it is it is a genuine reason, but almost to play devil's advocate a little, if it is publicly accessible, from a legal perspective, or certainly from Facebook's perspective, if you are posting something on a public profile, it's publicly accessible.
Yes, but what does public mean, and what is the understanding of the individual?
And I think that's probably getting down to where the question really lies, as in as a society and we as a profession are struggling to socialise ourselves into this world, and I think then you have not just vulnerable service users, you have just people are still negotiating, just the illustration of how Facebook has changed its privacy settings from inception all the way to this point, and we've even had more discussion over it in the media recently, is that we are almost socialising ourselves into this world, and at the moment, people, it is publicly accessible information. So from that legal perspective, actually you're doing nothing wrong by looking at publicly accessible information. From an ethical perspective, you are then thinking, but actually these people, a couple of my interviewees were, I know this, I know that I'm very careful and I do all of these things. And when we actually then made them go and look at their public profile, they realised that everything was fully public, and they were horrified by that. So this context of, I'm confident I know what I'm doing, but what you're actually doing is something different, is not only an issue for the profession, but it's an issue for us discussing the ethics of searching for individuals, and also they can search for us.
Oh, yes. Well, and that's one of the biggest changes that, and again, Joanne, you kind of mentioned that at the start of the webinar, where in actual fact, and you, Paul, have also mentioned the fact that, you might get to the point you've had a good Saturday night, someone sent out some pictures, and they post it up, and then you're sitting in you've gone on a home visit and you're talking to a parent about, the drinking problem that they've had, and they said, well, I've got a picture of you. or as I've heard, horror stories where actually it comes out as part of the child protection conference, what happens in those circumstances it's really quite awful. And as you've said, there is this shift in power. So Joanne, what's your view, kind of building on what we've heard?
I think that and it's interesting to reflect, because I practiced before social media was invented, really. So I would think about the the veracity of the information that's online. People post jokes, fake news, alternative truth, etc. And people tell a story about their own lives on social media, don't they?
And those stories are not always accurate.
Well, they're somebody's representation of themselves, aren't they?
Yeah.
So I think you'd have to kind of have that in your mind.
Yeah.
But I think you'd also, for me, I would be, have I got permission from this person who I'm working with, who I'm building a relationship with, to go and look at what they've posted online? And I think if I've got explicit consent, and I think if it's part of a statutory intervention, then that would be a yes. But under those circumstances, and I understand that agencies that do that, there's a mechanism.
Yes.
It's not just I can go and do it, but there is a mechanism. And what was worrying before, when we were talking before in Sage and Sage's research, is that it was just because I was a bit curious, and I don't think that's acceptable. I just don't think it's acceptable.
That comes back to being accountable again, isn't it? Can you justify something that you are or are not doing?
Yes.
So can you is there evidence to say, right, in the context, can I clarify why I want to do it, and can I confirm why I want to do it, and is there evidence to support that? So if there is, we're talking about section 1, yes, I have this this framework by which I should intervene at this point. Just going on, I know that some research I've recently read is that for doctors were doing it just to be a bit nosy. And actually that's not really a justifiable reason to do it. So I think it's about having evidence to support your practice.
And within the organisation there should be, and I've heard of a number of organisations where certainly local authorities and around the area of child protection, they do allow practitioners to look online. However, what happens is there are these checks and balances that are constantly in place. So, literally the practitioner has to set out, why do you want to look online? What evidence, what information would that bring to you? Okay, and then that goes up the ladder in terms of someone signing it off. So, it's maybe seen by the principal social worker, and then it might be seen by the head of service. It's run by legal, so it's all very clear about the lines of accountability and what was taken into account. Because if that is challenged, then you need to be able to respond appropriately.
And I think we also have to be very careful, and that there are platforms that tell you if someone's been viewing your profile. So if you, it's probably an unlikely event. Sometimes we call them never events, but it just takes that one occasion for you to be challenged, and you have to make sure you can justify what you were doing and why you were doing it.
There are regular and well-established channels for social workers to gather information from different agencies that you work with, from the people that you're working with themselves.
Yes, absolutely.
Before you'd need to do anything around that. And I think I think this idea that it's public and it's out there already. This is about social work. We're not police, because I think other professions, like the police, wouldn't have that, because they've got a different role, they've got a different agenda. But
their justification would be a different one.
Absolutely, but not in social work.
Just the last thing, and I think what information I'm getting mostly from the field is that there's need to be protection for both the practitioners and social workers.
Yeah.
If you're going to be going through down that road, there needs to be protection. Another thing is that for young people and children, young people, that is their social space. We need to seek consent if we'll be going in there.
Yeah,
I mean, it's all about operating in places where there's a bit of empowerment and power sharing. We need to operate at that level. There need to be a very good balance if you're going to take that route.
That's absolutely great. Thank you. So we're kind of moving in. I can't believe time has moved so quickly. So we're just kind of going into the kind of last quarter of our discussion, and really I'm going to kind of open up with a question towards Gemma, and then we're going to go broader. So, and that's taking us back to this notion of professionalism. So, and I know that you set out the challenges in terms of the different domains, but really just kind of taking that further. So, in terms of the challenges for if social work practitioners are being directed towards the use of social media, obviously we've talked about policy, obviously we've talked about procedures and their own position, but just thinking about taking that thought of it a bit further.
So I think the primary thing I would say is, we are ultimately professionalism about being working within the code of practice that we have, whether that be social work, HCPC, or any other, for that matter. And within that, accountability is about you being able to, first of all, make decisions based on the evidence that's available to you, and you being able to justify those very clearly. It's not simple enough to just have an excuse. A lot professionalism is about using evidence to inform your practice, and when you're working with social media, that should be no different. So in some ways, I understand social media has almost enhanced an issue that we perhaps already had and brought it to the forefront. It's sustained in time. It's everybody can see it. A passing comment in the street beforehand would never have been there used as evidence. So in some ways, I think our professionalism shouldn't almost change because we've got social media, in that, if you're the kind of person who is going to post a picture of a service user and laugh about them online, that says more about your character and your professionalism in general, rather than the social media aspect of that. So the primary thing for me is making sure that anything you do or do not do, that you have clear an evidence base by which to do that, whether that be some kind of sanction, whether that be some kind of policy, whether that be some kind of professional code. So that's one of the big things for me. I think one of the other things, although I know we're quite focused on the challenges, but actually,
what are the opportunities?
Social media for me is, we seem to be in this world where we see it as this horrible and negative, thing, and actually it brings with it quite a lot of opportunities. Support groups, networking people who would not normally be able to network with each other. I've personally used it to something called the Drift Project, where we brought people with ADHD or children with ADHD into a forum, and we discussed research, and that spread across something like 41 countries, and it started off very local, and it was a real benefit because people started to understand that when a newspaper reported this research project and we weren't funding this, or we discussed that and helped them to see actually the research doesn't necessarily mean what the media is saying it means, and actually go to this place or that place for further information. So it does bring with it quite a lot of opportunities. So until we've kind of come to some kind of consensus and decided what is right, the biggest piece of advice I always say to people is, Make sure that your practice is formed by evidence and that you can justify what you're doing and why you're doing it, and then you cannot be held liable for anything that you're doing.
Anybody want to add to that?
I think it's important about raising this idea about opportunities, and particularly around the sort of wider agenda of social work in terms of social justice. And I think what we've seen in recent years is the growth of advocacy organisations and service user organisations, promoting their cause, forging networks, forging alliances, and undertaking advocacy and self-advocacy to challenge either government policy or local authority activity, or all sorts of other sort of issues that are around. And I think social work has a role definitely in supporting that. There was an interesting piece of research that I was looking at. It was Sitter and Kernu, who were using social media in advocacy work, working with adults with disabilities in Canada, where if you're an adult with disabilities, learning disabilities we'd perhaps call them, you have to get permission from a doctor to marry. Under the legislation, and this group said, no, we don't actually think that that's okay. It's discriminatory. So they co-produced videos and promoted it using social media, and more traditional advocacy methods as well. Because what the research says is actually just doing advocacy on social media doesn't work. It needs the face-to-face and it needs the real contact as well. That marriage legislation is now under review as a result of people saying, no, I don't like this.
Social action.
And we're going to do something about it. So I think that as social work students, you need to really think about, hey, hang on, what can I do to support the people that I work with on a wider scale, rather than always the individual or the family.
Paul?
Yeah, I think it's just also emphasizing, I think Gemma, you must have touched it, Joanne must have touched it. So in terms of emphasizing or integrating that element of e-professionalism, as much as you're conducting yourself in a professional way offline, in the same case should be conducting yourself online. And at the same time, we also need to look at social media in a positive way in terms of the ethical use and the value-based solution, the inclusion of technology in social work practice. We should not be shying away from social media because it has taken such a steep turn. It's not running away. It's for us to embrace it and use it in a positive way in enhancing relationship and in fostering positive relationship and engaging with clients.
We've had, just in the last few minutes of time really, we've had a number of students kind of contact us beforehand, before we even broadcast the webinar today. And certainly we had comment from Deborah Smith, who's a second level social work student on the programme. And Deborah's made kind of mention of, particularly around young people and their risk of exploitation using social media, and that's been a big thing. You've got child sexual exploitation. That's kind of covered headlines. I was just wondering what people's views were on this. Particularly when you're working with kind of vulnerable young people, where we're working with children in care. I was just wondering what people's views were on this.
I think it was back to what we'd said before, really, about what can social media tell you that established traditional channels can't, and what evidence have you got that this is an approach that should use, and what checks and balances are in place for you to use that. I think it's, for me, I think it's, what right would I have to search for somebody on there, and what legitimises it, what sort of bit of legislation governs whether or not I can do that. I'm not sure it's social workers' role to investigate social media networks and profiles. I don't think that comes into what we do.
Absolutely.
But that could be multi-agency working. Is that actually, if you've got genuine concerns and you can confirm and clarify that, then at which point you go through what would be an escalation process in any other scenario. The social media aspect here is simply a tool.
Yes.
It's not there as being separate and somewhere over here.
Exactly.
You have, I'm sure, certainly we would in healthcare, have processes by which we raise those concerns.
Yes.
And if you've got that, social media can often be of real benefit because you can see the context, you can clarify what's going on, and you can confirm what's going on, at which point you've got quite good evidence to escalate that. So I think from that point of view, I don't think you should discourage people from using social media for that reason, but it really does need to be justified.
Yeah. And I think also there's something about educating young people. So, you know, that's absolutely critical. And we also need to recognise that young people also know how to keep themselves safe. And actually, the first place to start in a conversation with a young person is, how are you keeping yourself safe? Okay, and then build from that. And that will give you a kind of audit on what they're doing or what they're not doing, and you can talk into that. Whereas I think sometimes the view is, oh, they're young, they're vulnerable, no social media. And certainly my research around young people in care and the use of social media, that's the kind of reaction that I'm getting from social work practitioners and I'm getting from foster carers, like, cut it off, it shouldn't be allowed, it makes life really difficult. So, you know, it is about kind of checking in with the young person. What are you doing? And how are you using it? And tell me about it. Because it is their life. You know, it's not a part of their life, it is their life. As you would do with anyone.
And young people, they've never known a world without this.
Exactly.
This is normal.
Yes.
And in fact, people report, if you're not on social media, that you're a bit weird and you miss out on things. So instead of sort of shying away from it, what are the mechanisms by which we can educate people, socialise people into this world, so that they are aware of the risks, they're aware of these, some of the things that might be there. Because one of the things, and I don't know whether this is true for social work, but in healthcare we've been very, must not do it. It's very much about don'ts. And I just think the more we resist it, we aren't going to get rid of this. This is going nowhere. So let's start thinking about how we solve the problem rather than completely get rid of the problem.
I just want to very quickly touch on a couple of other kind of questions raised by students, and we've only got about 4 minutes left, so I want very short answers really. So we've had Alan, who's a first level student on the programme, and he said, do you believe there should be more documentaries on TV, social media, to highlight the role of social workers? And we know that was it a Channel 4 production?
Channel 4 production.
I don't know. I mean, I don't know what people think. Simply put, yes or no?
I think I'd go for it. Advocate for it.
Okay.
Yeah, strongly advocate for it. Yeah.
Yes, definitely more on the role of social workers, but avoiding the stereotyping and the scapegoating that goes on around social workers on the television.
Okay.
I would reflect that comment. Actually, yes.
Right. Okay. And then the final question is from Anthony, who's on our postgraduate programme. And he said, and we've begun to touch on this, but it might be worthwhile just kind of succinctly saying how social media can be used by agencies to keep in touch with service users around issues of safe practice and around issues of kind of information governance. So actually using the tool of social media to educate as opposed to kind of not use it at all and scare people off. Again, what are people's views? Very, very quickly, we've got a couple of minutes left. Who wants to start?
I think generally agencies can provide information about services and changes in organisations to service users through the broadcasting or PR function of social media, information about the work of the organisation and responses to local and national issues that have an impact. Other things that you can do maybe have takeover days, where you're inviting people that you're working with, service users in, to talk about their experience of working with the organisation. And they don't have to be sort of huge events, they can be small events. So I think looking at the opportunities around that, and always within the policies. But if you review the policies and you co-construct the policies with service users, you've got a better chance of success.
Couple of sentences from either of you before
I think I'd go on the aspect of my area I'm looking at mostly for young people and children. I mean, for that clientele group is they want to be public but not in public. So it's all about educating them around the safe use of social media, the safe practice. That's where the emphasis on.
Okay.
Yeah.
Gemma.
And I would reflect some of these points in that it can be certainly used to engage hard to reach groups and vulnerable groups.
Yes.
They're protected but not not too vulnerable yet. And like I said, one of the projects we've done, we've engaged people with the Drift project, and that can be used in a very similar way. There has been some research in actually gaining feedback from service users on services.
Yes.
With the use of social media or Twitter polls and things like that.
Yes.
So that's a real opportunity as well.
Absolutely, there it really is. Can I just thank you all for such a fascinating discussion, wide-ranging, very well informed. I really enjoyed it. I hope it's been of real benefit to you. We say the least, there will be more webinars running, but please do. There's an opportunity, obviously, to think about what's been said. And what we will be doing as a university is we will be sending out some information to you. I know that Joanne quoted a number of journal articles, and we will be making that kind of reading list available to you. If you do have any further questions, please don't hesitate to kind of email into the university, and we will try and provide some responses to you. Thank you so very much for joining us. Bye-bye.